Football at Forward, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com, and search Inside the Birds on YouTube. And it's being brought to you by the Gallery Bar Booking Games inside Ocean Casino and Resort in Atlantic City. Go to the Gallery, go to Ocean, go for the win this football season. For more information, visit OceanAC.com. And it's a Wednesday, and that means it's time for Geoff Mosher to join the conversation here on 97.3 ESPN. Geoff, welcome back. How you doing on this Wednesday?
I am great, Josh. And now I think I'm good. As we discussed, I'm going to be headed to the Phillies game. So as I told you, it's somewhat like, is that like getting ready for your own funeral these days? I mean, I'm hoping to have a good time tonight, but I'm not sure whether to be in the camp of just booing every single one of them, or giving that standing ovation Trey Turner style and hope that is the remedy for the entire team.
Well, considering how horrible the lineup looks tonight, I think you have a better chance of booing than anything else.
Probably, but you know what? I at least applaud a lineup switch or a change.
So, Geoff, let's talk to you about something that's not as depressing, which is the Eagles. And before we get into the particulars from the joint practice and then the team preparing for the next preseason game, I want to ask you about the question I asked in the last hour, which is, we have been told multiple places, right? Brandon Graham has talked about it. Lane Johnson has talked about it. You guys talked about it on the Inside the Birds podcast. The Eagles, subconsciously admitted it. The problem last year was the coaching. So if this team had the third worst in the NFL in points allowed per game, and they were second worst in pass defense, and they were bottom 10 in turnovers forced on defense, is it fair to say that Vic Fangio may be the biggest upgrade of the offseason for this team?
I'm a big believer that, in the NFL, coaching is probably more important than, say, baseball or the NBA, right, where talent reigns supreme. Clearly, when you have coaches who have to call every single play and are probably more involved in player development than a baseball manager or an NBA coach, then, yeah, I see the addition of Vic Fangio. And not just that, but the fact that most of his position coaches have worked for him before. So you don't have that confusion from last year. You don't have like two different hybrid defenses. You don't have a guy trying to run a template of a Fangio defense. You have Vic Fangio and his coaches. I do believe that makes a huge difference. But Josh, at the end of the day, the improvement of the Eagles defense will have to be because of the improvement of the talent in the secondary, more so than the coaching staff. And I say that because, as highly regarded as Vic Fangio is, I think if you look at his career as a play caller from Chicago to San Francisco to the Texans to Carolina, all that, he's had as many bottom 10 defenses as top 10 defenses. And I'm not trying to disparage him for that. What I'm just simply saying is when he's had good talent, he's obviously been able to maximize it. But when he's had bad talent, the idea of Vic Fangio just being the guy there didn't matter at that point. So I do think the talent overall, especially in the secondary, is going to have to be the difference for the Eagles this year than last year.
Okay, so if we look at the secondary, so what do we do about a team that drafts a guy in the first round, but then is giving him so many reps at nickel? And Fangio has said nickel and corner are not the same, okay? So if you draft a guy to be a cornerback, but then as a rookie, you're putting him in nickel, is that out of necessity, or is Quintin Mitchell just that talented?
Well, I talked about this with Mike last week. I was sort of trying to get a bigger picture outlook of why this was going on. And I think Vic Fangio confirmed what I had said last week in his press conference. For him right now, it's about fielding the best secondary possible. And Quintin Mitchell playing nickelback, as long as he's doing it well, which so far he seems to be doing, then enables Vic Fangio to play Isaiah Rodgers outside. And, Rodgers runs a 4-2. He's dynamic. He's athletic. I mean, it certainly comes with a little bit of peril when you're only 5'9" and you're playing outside corner. But the alternative for Vic, and this is all while Cooper DeJean was sidelined, right, Josh, is that he plays Quintin Mitchell at his natural outside position opposite Slay, and then needs to find someone to play nickel back. And it's not going to be Rodgers because he did not play inside nickel in Indianapolis, and he hasn't practiced there yet.
Right.
It's not going to be Ringo. He's never played there. And you're going back down the Avante Maddox / Tyler Hall route, right? And that just, to me, you go back to last year's defense and you were slow, you were not dynamic, you were basic, you just didn't have great athletes. So enabling yourself to play Rodgers on the outside and Quintin Mitchell on the inside, opposite Slay, gives you more athleticism and more dynamic ability in your starting cornerback group than the alternative. So, but now the question is, once with Cooper DeJean now back, and once he's 2 to 3 to 4 weeks in, maybe he wants to play in this preseason game, coming the third one, not tomorrow's. Once he gets into this thing, once he starts to round into form, if he can effectively play the nickel, will we then see Quintin Mitchell move to the outside to play where he was originally drafted? Because then you're not losing at anything out of as far as athleticism or dynamite ability, because Cooper DeJean is a dynamic athlete as well.
You mentioned DeJean. I want to ask you about that because there was speculation from the draft that he could be potentially a guy who might have to move to safety in the NFL. But DeJean has said multiple times that he has only gotten work at corner and at nickel. So do you think the fact that he's only gotten work at those two positions is a clear enough sign of what his role would be on this defense?
Tough to say, Josh. Only because nobody would have thought Quintin Mitchell was going to work at nickel going into camp, and that seemed to be a decision that the coaching staff made again to get the best combination to see if he could handle it. So I don't want to. Well, so I imagine that right now Cooper DeJean is working at the spots that he's played before in college, right? He's played corner. I believe he's played some nickel at Iowa, and so you're not trying to put too much on this plate. So for the spirit of your question, the Eagles are still really thin at safety, right? So let's say by week 3 or week 4, the Eagles really like how Cooper DeJean has progressed and they're ready to play him in a real actual game, regular season game. But let's say that Quintin Mitchell is doing really well at nickel and Isaiah Rodgers is playing at a high level at outside. Do they then start to experiment with Cooper DeJean at safety because that would again give them the best combination that they can get to put out there in the secondary? Maybe. So I don't want to slam the door on that because obviously Cooper DeJean came out of the draft and some teams looked at him and thought, hey, he probably might be a better safety or a nickel than say an outside corner nickel. So I don't want what we're seeing now is I think what is best for the team, and what we're seeing 4 or 5 weeks from now might be different.
Talking with Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com, at Geoff P. Mosher over on the Twitter X platform. Here on Football at 4, Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill on 97.3 ESPN. The reason I'm asking some of these questions, Geoff, is because, Avante Maddox.
Because it's August?
Well, aside from that.
Just kidding. Go ahead.
No, it's because of Avante Maddox, because he had been the presumptuous nickel guy for years now, right? And he hasn't been able to stay healthy. But now in training camp this year, Fangio is giving him more and more work at safety in these practices, and which is opening the door for guys like Mitchell to get more reps at the nickel. So does it make sense to you for the Eagles to enter the year with Avante Maddox at safety instead of nickel?
I don't know. And I say that not to be elusive with the question or evade it, but Andrew DeCecco will be on the podcast, the Inside the Birds podcast with me tomorrow. We've already recorded it. And he had some interesting observations about Avante Maddox, specifically the level of play that he thinks Avante's playing at right now in any position. And, without making it a total tease, he's just concerned. And there's been a lot of injuries, as you mentioned, right? There's been a lot of now there's position switching. He's a little bit older. Remember, this guy only signed a 1-year deal. He went out there. He didn't really find a whole lot. So I'm not exactly sure that we definitely pencil Avante Maddox in on the team. I mean, I get that they're thin at safety, but now that Cooper DeJean's back, if you want to, maybe if the team wants to count him as a future potential safety or an interior type defender that you have alongside C.J. Gardner-Johnson. And remember, Sidney Brown's going to come back, I'm sure, pretty soon, right? And then you've got Reed Blankenship. Like, I can't say for sure, Josh, that Avante Maddox is definitely making the team to be able to say that he fits better at one position or the other because, you know, we've seen people's expiration dates come and his might have reached here if things don't change a little bit for him in camp.
Speaking of guys in their roles, let's talk about the ILBs, the inside linebackers. You know, at the very start of the training camp, we were seeing a lot of Devin White, Zach Bond as the primary tandem. Now, as the weeks have gone on, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is getting more work. Nakobe Dean is getting more work. Jeff, you mentioned on Monday on Football at 4 that you wouldn't be surprised if, you know, by halfway through the end of the year, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is one of the main guys at the inside linebacker. I mean, are we trending in a way that the Eagles are almost like, you know, letting the guys, you know, prove their own worth, it seems like, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it would be hard to keep Jeremiah Trotter Jr. off the field if he's playing this well. But this is where we all have to stop and say, remember that this is training camp, and what you see in training camp doesn't always translate immediately. Sometimes it doesn't translate at all to regular season games. So it appears that you've got Devin White, Nakobe Dean, and Zach Bond still sort of duking it out here to be your top two linebackers in your nickel. Now, that doesn't mean Trotter won't carve out some kind of role, certainly special teams, but even on defense, you can go situational. You can have different kind of packages for different down and distances that you might feel more comfortable with Trotter in. But the big question, Josh, is really, and I think, you know, yesterday's practice in Foxborough may have started to supply a little bit of an answer to that, because yesterday's practice, Nakobe Dean ran with Devin White first team, at least more than he had normally. It had been White and Bond. You heard Vic Fangio say, hey, Bond did all right in the preseason game, but he's out of place a few times. So I'm wondering if the first major move at this position, and it's a move that Adam and I have kind of forecasted, we thought this might eventually happen, although it hasn't happened yet, really. We got to see more what goes on, is Nakobe Dean getting back to being a starting inside linebacker.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with Nakobe Dean, is that, you know, he was a guy that came with so much promise coming out of college, Jeff. And, you know, we had a listener make this comment a little bit earlier. They asked about, you know, could we be seeing what the future is going to look like for Philadelphia? Because you drafted all these guys from Georgia: Dean, Smith, Davis, Carter, Ringo. At some point, Jeff, some of these guys got to show up and start doing something to pay off all this investment.
It's no doubt about it. Huge year for all three of them. Well, I wouldn't say huge year for Jalen Carter. I think he's of the three, the less under the microscope. Obviously, he has to do better than last year as the year goes on. But, I mean, you saw his level of play when he played well, and it was pretty darn impressive. Jordan Davis is the guy that's got to prove that he can play at a really high level from top to bottom all year long, and then eventually maybe even, you know, become a little bit of a pocket pusher. And then, of course, Nakobe staying healthy and taking over a starting role, being more than just a special teamer. Yeah, absolutely critical for that. And then I guess to your point, it's a little bit of a referendum on, we'll call it the process, the Georgia process, like the Sixers process, right?
Right.
Like just getting all the Georgia guys, you know, Ringo is part of that too. Was that the correct narrative at the end of the day, that if you just draft guys from this national championship defense, you're naturally going to, you know, automatically be a much better defense yourself?
Well, that was always the question with Alabama. People wanted people to draft people from Alabama for years because they were winning championships, and it's Nick Saban. So it's kind of the same deal with this. It's like, well, if you draft all these guys, then what happens is the question. Speaking of the joint practice, Jeff, what do you say to the people? And I've seen these comments the last 24 hours. Well, it's the Patriots. You're not playing the Patriots in the regular season. Like, what do you say to the people who are looking at the joint practice and poo-pooing it?
Well, I don't know why you poo-poo any joint practice, because it's always good to see a different offense and a different defense. I mean, it's just practice. So, I mean, like, there's really nothing to poo-poo about it. But at the same time, nothing to really, I suppose, when you're sort of talent deficient in a lot of the areas, there's also nothing to go gaga about because a guy catches a touchdown or a guy gets a sack, a quote-unquote sack, two-handed touch sack. But, at the end of the day, you're just trying to get better by facing a different team, a different scheme, different personnel than the people you see every single day. I think that matters for a guy like Zach Baun, who, you're looking to see if he understands the intricacies of playing inside linebacker. Well, it's a little bit easier for Zach to do that when every single day he's facing the same offense, Eagles offense, and he kind of understands certain tendencies there. Now, if you throw, just like the preseason game in Baltimore, now you throw a different team out there who may draw the red circle around him and try to confuse him with certain formations or things that they do. Does that work?
Call more for Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com, and at Geoff P. Mosher on the Twitter X platform. Jeff, I want to ask you a version of the question I asked Adam yesterday, because, we were talking yesterday about, the importance of the number 2 and the number 3 wide receiver. We know Howie Roseman is famous or infamous, depending on who you ask, for making moves for the season and even in season to make additions to this team. If Howie's going to make that move, Jeff, is it more likely to be the number 3 wide receiver or the number 2 tight end?
Probably. Oh, I would say the number 3 wide, no doubt. Only because, I know Grant Calcaterra is out with a shoulder issue right now. Maybe if that's worse than we think, and he's going to be out a really long, then maybe he might feel like he has to make a move. But he still has C.J. Uzomah. C.J. Uzomah is a veteran. He may not have a lot left in the tank, but he can still block, and that's really a key role for their wide tight end, their number 2 tight end that Jack Stoll was able to do the last few years, block and catch a little. So they can kind of get away with Uzomah and then maybe a Alberto or a E.J. Jenkins. But, the number 3, it's hard to hide your number 3 wide receiver when you're an 11 personnel-based offense. So if they're not loving what they're seeing, and even if they are loving what they're seeing, but skeptical that a guy like Britton Covey or a guy like Johnny Wilson can really hold up as in that spot, then I would see them making a move there.
Yeah, I'm just trying to decipher it because, first of all, you mentioned Calcaterra's got a shoulder. Calcaterra always has something, Jeff. The guy is constantly getting injured. And Adam brought up yesterday about how C.J. Uzomah has been pretty disappointing at times in this training camp and these practices. And I'm sorry, but I'm not getting excited about E.J. Jenkins or Alberto at all. And I mean, listen, I understand that Kellen Moore has a history of doing very well with tight ends, but I mean, I got to be honest, Jeff. No Eagle fan is going to be like, let me tell you who we're looking forward to seeing catch touchdowns, E.J. Jenkins this year. You know what I mean? So, like,
sure.
and Dallas Goedert himself has been injured over the years. So that's why I'm wondering, in an offense with Kellen Moore where his tight ends average 8 touchdowns, almost 8 touchdowns per year. It's like 7.78 is the actual average. But when they average almost 8 touchdowns per year, but under Sirianni and Steichen, they average 4 touchdowns per year. We know that Kellen Moore is going to use these guys, and I'm just trying to decipher as I look at this team and how not the initial 53-man looks, but how the final 53-man looks, how much of an investment Howie might have to make in improving the tight end before the season.
Yeah, and it wouldn't shock me if, listen, especially around veteran cutdown, you find a veteran tight end out there who's got a little block. I mean, they have it already in Uzomah, but if they wanted to have just another one to have on the practice squad, that's fine. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about a starting position versus backup position, right, I view the slot receiver as a starting position because the Eagles are going to be an 11 personnel, 3 wide, 1 tight end, almost 65, 70% of the time, if they can, that's what they want to be. And all they would need in that regard, in that scenario, is a healthy Dallas Goedert. And you're not necessarily worried about the number 2 tight end. But if Johnny Wilson or Britton Covey is your guy that you're asking to play 65 to 70% of the snaps of the game as a number 3 receiver, you're probably thinking to yourself, I'm not 100% sold on that. You're talking about a rookie and a punt returner.
Which leads me right into the number 3 receiver question. Britton Covey looked pretty good in that preseason game. But I don't think anyone is going to pretend like Britton Covey is the next coming of like Wes Welker or anything.
Right.
So Paris Campbell finally not injured anymore. So he's been injured about a gazillion times himself. Assuming he's in the mix, if the Eagles start the season with Paris Campbell as the number 3 wide receiver and Britton Covey as the 4, is that good enough?
Well, yes and no, right? Is it good enough? If Paris Campbell is healthy and stays healthy and can give you some slot reps, which he's done before. I mean, he's not a slot receiver, honestly, but he did play it a couple of years ago with Indianapolis when they had really no choice. And he caught the most passes of his career. Now, he also had the lowest yards per catch of his career. But at least he's a veteran guy who understands route trees, knows how to get open. So if he starts the season as your number 3 receiver and can play the slot, move out. See, he's important because he can move. He can play outside as long as he's healthy. If you get an injury to, say, A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith. But let's say Paris Campbell just doesn't make it through camp and is not healthy. Then you're in trouble because neither Covey or Johnny Wilson, not only are they not most likely not equipped to be full-time slot receivers, not really equipped to be full-time outside wide receivers either. And if you had to miss Devontae Smith for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or A.J. Brown for 2 or 3 weeks, you'd be in a whole lot of trouble there.
Jeff, before I let you go, tomorrow night, Eagles preseason game number 2, what is the player or the position you are going to be watching the closest?
Oh, the offensive and defensive lines, Josh. I'm fascinated. I don't know if everybody else is. I don't know how much you've talked about it or Mike talked about it. I'm just so fascinated with Jeff Stoutland's affinity for Brett Toth, that now Brett Toth is the backup center. And, I guess if Cam Jurgens is out, then it's Brett Toth, not Matt Hennessy,
Right.
And yet they drafted a center in Dylan McMahon, too. So usually you keep your draft pick. So if you're keeping Jurgens, Toth, and McMahon, right, doesn't seem to be a whole lot of room for Matt Hennessy, unless you want to call him a guard. But if you're starting Mekhi Becton, right, then you're keeping Tyler Steen, and you've got this Darian Kennard who played every single snap. I've never seen this before in a preseason game. Guy played every single snap at right tackle. Thought he did all right. Came out well against the Ravens. So you got him, you got Fred Johnson, and guys who I thought had a good shot to make the team because they played a little bit in this league, or they, Hennessy being a guy who came over from Atlanta, Temple kid. Now all of a sudden you're thinking, where does he fit? Where's Matt Sharping, who started playoff games, I believe, for the Bengals? Where's he fit? Where does Nick Gates fit? I mean, this guy has played center and guard in the NFL for a few years and played at a high enough level that the Commanders gave him a fairly decent contract a year or two ago. He's just been hurt. So I'm just looking at this whole offensive line, trying to figure it all out. I forgot to mention Trevor Keegan. He's another left guard. He's only played left guard. So I just where's Matt Hennessy showing up here? And then on the defensive line, we know about the starting 3 interior defensive linemen. Moro Ojomo looks like he's the number 4. Marlon Tuipulotu has played well as a 5, but really not too many veterans. No veterans there in the backup ranks. You got Thomas Booker trying to duke it out with, I guess, Gabe Hall for that last spot there in the interior defensive line. So I want to see how well those guys do.
He's Geoff Mosher at Jeff B. Mosher on Twitter X platform, Inside the Birds podcast. Like, subscribe, download wherever you get your podcasts. Also subscribe to the Inside the Birds YouTube channel. And don't forget about the Inside the Birds Patreon, where you get all the exclusive content from Geoff Mosher, Adam Kaplan, and Andrew DeCecco. And Jeff joined us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Jeff, appreciate the time, and good luck with the Phillies game tonight.
Thank you for wishing me luck. We will need it. Take care, Josh.